World History, Episode 8, Ancient Egyptian Civilization 2. The ancient Egyptians firmly believed in the afterlife. In the early Old Kingdom, the afterlife was exclusive to the pharaohs, and the only chance for ordinary people to achieve eternal life was through loyalty to the royal family. Therefore, having one's tomb near the pharaohs was considered a great honor, and even erecting a tombstone, there was a significant fortune in one's lifetime. By the end of the Old Kingdom, the concept of the afterlife began to center around Osiris. Osiris was initially worshipped as the embodiment of the soil, plants, and the Nile River. He symbolized the powerful force of fertility and life, becoming the king of the afterlife and the embodiment of the pharaoh governing people's afterlives. The worship of Osiris eventually incorporated ethical and moral elements, giving rise to the idea of posthumous judgment. Who was Osiris, and why did people worship him? What does the posthumous judgment signify? What is the significance of mummification? Let us unravel the mysteries of the ancient Egyptian beliefs in the afterlife together. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death, Osiris would judge them. Those who had done good deeds and accumulated virtue in life could pass Osiris's judgment and obtain eternal life, while the wicked would not pass the judgment and suffer a second death, leading to eternal death. This belief was popular among ordinary people because it offered hope for eternal life, making the worship of Osiris more deeply rooted in their hearts. The Egyptians believed that the first king to rule Egypt when he died was called Asar. He was mummified, conquered death, and became the god and ruler of the dead. His son, who had only one son, became the ruler of the living. When Horus died, he went to the afterlife to inherit his father's position, becoming the ruler of the dead. Later, his son again became fearful. So this was actually a continuous cycle of a terrifying society. But later, Osiris actually became the idea of anyone who died and passed judgment in the afterlife. He became Osiris, so much so that the word Osiris became equivalent to our word delete. Therefore, if someone died and went to the afterlife, they became Osiris. This almost became the democratization of religion. At first, only the death of the king was a cause for fear, which became society. But gradually, religion became democratized. Every deceased person became Osiris, so that when someone died, you called them an Osirian, and the term Osirian means mummy. Correspondingly, religious texts that were only available to the royal family during the Old Kingdom period also began to be used by noble officials in the Middle Kingdom, known as the coffin texts. The New Kingdom period was the peak of Osiris worship, and its prominent manifestation was the widespread prevalence of the Book of the Dead, which evolved from pyramid inscriptions and coffin texts. The Book of the Dead was a guide for the immortality of all people in the New Kingdom period, aiming to guide the deceased to reach eternal life smoothly. The specific content includes many prayers and spells. For example, there are such spells that tell the deceased how to pass the judgment before the god of death smoothly. There are words like, "I have not killed anyone," "I have not been disrespectful to the gods," "I have not taken other people's things," etc. Therefore, the Book of the Dead opened the door to the afterlife for the Egyptians. Due to its small size and low price, most Egyptians could buy it and place it in their own tombs. The prevalence of the Book of the Dead greatly promoted the development of Osiris worship. People believed that with the guidance of the Book of the Dead, everyone could become Osiris after death and enjoy eternal life. For ancient Egypt, both the afterlife and the world were unknown places. Obviously, no one has gone and come back, so they imagined it, imagining it filled with gates and gatekeepers. You must pass through each gate, and you must have a good understanding of the afterlife to navigate it, a world you do not know. And all the real things to navigate in this huge real world that you do not know, you need something like a map. So everyone bought a scroll of papyrus, which we call the Book of the Dead. This is the book you carry with you, telling you what to do later through everything, to be declared innocent and released. Unless you are declared innocent and finished, you must carry the Book of the Dead to tell you what to do, otherwise you will be lost. The papyrus inscribed with the Book of the Dead could be bought by everyone and placed in the tomb for burial. With the power of the wrinkles, people could easily pass Osiris's judgment. Therefore, in theory, the door to the afterlife was open to everyone. If the idea of posthumous judgment reflects the awakening of the ancient Egyptian self-awareness, then this nascent introspection was limited and stifled by the parallel development of the numerous thoughts of emphasizing strength. The worship of the sun god and Osiris, worshipped together, constituted the core of the ancient Egyptian polytheistic religious beliefs. But the former tended towards the advanced stage of monotheistic worship with the development of royal power. In the middle of the Old Kingdom, about 2,500 years ago, the worship of the sun became a very, very important matter, so much so that the king had to build two things in his life: a pyramid for himself, and every king tried. The sun's mirror became so dominant in ancient Egypt that it almost competed with the pharaoh himself. In my view, there was always some friction between the king and the singing priests, the sun priests. They became so powerful that they could rule the king himself. In the later period of the New Kingdom, with the decline of royal power, to meet people's psychological needs, people returned to primitive religions to seek relief, and animal worship became very popular. People rediscovered the superhuman power and vitality in animals such as cows, cats, and snakes, and making mummies for these sacred animals became a fashion of the time. This practice began around 700 BC, but became more common in the Greco-Roman period. But they believed that gods had both human and animal forms. Therefore, they determined specific gods with specific animals, from cats to birds, crocodiles, cows. Almost everything non-human was mummified at some stage. Moreover, the exterior of animal mummies was often painted with faces, so they looked like the animal mummies inside. In fact, huge estates were established to specifically breed animals. Like processing the bodies of the dead into mummies, the Egyptians hoped to combine the continuation of the body with the permanent solidity of the dwelling to build an eternal afterlife. To achieve this wish, they chose the most durable building materials that were locally reproduced: stone. Among the ancient buildings preserved in Egypt, the best preserved are two types. One is tombs and the other is temple buildings. The residence where people lived at the time, including the royal palace, are very poorly preserved. Why? Because people at the time used the best materials and the best ingredients to build their permanent dwellings, that is, their tombs to build their places of worship, temples, and the residence where they lived. Including the royal palace, they used mud bricks. Mud bricks are very cheap, and easy to make, but not easy to preserve. That's why many of the buildings we see now are not tombs, are temples, and the residents where people lived are very few. The ancient Egyptians spent more time and energy on their permanent dwellings. The construction of tombs during the Old Kingdom period was the first upgrade of pyramid construction. Located on the outskirts of Cairo, Giza from a distance is a golden desert scenery. In the era of building pyramids, this was once a busy construction site, with quarries and craftsmen's living areas nearby. Now, everything has returned to silence. There are also some relics under the sand or contemporary villages that are being excavated. The Giza pyramids are an architectural complex with the entrance on the north side. The main components of the pyramid architectural complex include the pyramid itself, the surrounding walls, the temple on the east side of the pyramid, the passage from the temple to the valley, and the valley temple on the edge of the valley, which will be the place where the king's body is processed into a mummy. The ancient Egyptians called the Pyramid of Khufu the Horizon of Khufu, and contemporary people call it the Great Pyramid. Its original height was 146 meters because the tip of its peak is no longer there, and now it is 137 meters. There are many theories about how the pyramids were built. Archaeologists have made inferences about the ramps used to build the Great Pyramid in recent years. Ramps were used to push and pull stone blocks upwards. And as the pyramid grew taller, the ramps also. There are now basically two theories, one suggesting that the ramps were straight, and the other suggesting that they were spiral. There are many theories about how the pyramids were built, and the most peculiar is that some people believe the pyramids were built by aliens. The pyramids are controversial. Some say it was just a monument built for someone. Some even say that people from outer space built games for the Egyptians. I think they are tools of the movies, and they are obviously also related to the worship of the sun, because the pyramid shape and the reflection of the sun are connected, but the king himself is the son of the sun god. Therefore, almost at the same time as the battle of the king, as the son of Ra, the sun disk, began, and the pyramid shape began. So in fact, they are tied together. I believe the pyramids are connected to things as barriers, but also to the city of the sun. To the east of the Khafre pyramid is the Sphinx, which the Arabs call the Father of Terror. It is generally believed to have been carved from a single block of limestone left over from the construction of the pyramids. No one knows exactly what the idea was. The widely accepted idea is that after the king built his pyramid and cut stone from this area, it was a huge rock cliff that looked like a lion with a human head. So it was just shaped to represent the king's face and the body of a lion, and then later, each king imitated and depicted himself as his own finger. But initially, we do not know why it appeared, nor do we know its significance in Egyptian mythology itself. What is this thing? Why? Why represent oneself? Yes, there is a way for a king to represent himself, but there is no theocracy in Egyptian mythology, so it is not really an animal that is worshipped. So we are not sure how I know? There have been several times in history when the Sphinx, buried by sand, has been cleared. The best known is the legend of Thutmose IV. It is said that when he was still a prince, he dreamed one day of the great Sphinx, who complained to him about being buried by sand. If he could clear it for him, he would bless him to become a king. The young prince cleared the sand from the great Sphinx, and later indeed became a very effective king. He ordered this story to be carved on a stele. Scholars who have seen the dream stele in early years say that the inscription mentions King Khafre clearing the sand from the Great Sphinx. But now the name of Khafre on the stele is blurred and cannot be verified. Due to social unrest, the construction of pyramids was interrupted for about half a century. After the reunification of the Middle Kingdom, construction was resumed and entered a short period of revival. In the New Kingdom, royal tombs took the form of rock-cut tombs, and pyramids disappeared from the scene. All pyramids were built on the west bank of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians believed that the west was where the afterlife was located, just as the sun sets in the west. Yes, it is a beautiful segment except for what we call the House of Eternity. Perhaps to understand what the House of Eternity is, we must understand the Egyptian personality. The Egyptians believed that a person's identity was composed of different entities, the most important of which was the body itself, the body and the life force, which we call the Ka and the Ba. Together, they constitute a life. Once someone dies, then the life force leaves the body, and the body becomes what the Egyptians themselves call the Khat. Then the body is mummified to preserve the will of the Ka. The Chia has the ability to leave the body, go out, enjoy life, eat, and even mate, enjoy the sun, see family and everything, and then return to the body to rest. To allow the Ka to leave the tomb, it must be able to return. And the Egyptians were always worried about the Ka getting lost. Therefore, this so-called House of Eternity is an instruction for the Ka, indicating that there are shafts leading to the corpse, to the burial chamber, where the body is located. The ancient Egyptians' belief in the afterlife is also reflected in their custom of mummifying. The actual preservation of human remains was a very important part of the Egyptian belief in the afterlife. For the Egyptians, it was very important that they believed the soul of the deceased could recognize the body and return to it. Therefore, they spent a lot of time trying to present the body as lifelike as possible so that the soul could return to it. The main salt used for preservation is a substance called natron, which is a salt that naturally exists in Egypt. However, the word mummy comes from the Arabic word mania, which means asphalt. Therefore, because the skin of the mummy is so black, the Arabs associated it with asphalt, which is how we get the word mummy in modern times. It takes 70 days from the death of the person to the burial to make a mummy and complete the related rituals. First, the body is taken to the beautiful house, where the first step of mummification is carried out. In the murals of priests, the jackal-headed Anubis, the patron god of the embalmers, is often seen helping to process the body. Modification is essentially dehydration. The Egyptians noticed that if you leave the body, the soft tissues will, because all the moisture in the body will decrease. So the most important thing is to bring the body into the purification or beautification tent. They open the body, extract all the internal organs, and put them in 4 cans, which you call the canopic jars. The lids of the 4 cans are different, each representing the 4 sons of Horus. Qebhsennuf, who is in charge of the intestines, Dua-Mutef, who is in charge of the stomach, and Hapi, who is in charge of the lungs. The cavities are cleaned with palm wine and spices, and then dried with natron. So they would dry the body like a piece of meat. They remove the internal organs, place the body in a desiccant to remove moisture, and further apply salt, resin, and other natural chemicals to preserve the body permanently. This takes 40 days. Next, the body is taken to the pure house, where it is washed with Nile water. Then the entire body is coated with melted resin to close the pores, protect the surface, and finally wrapped in linen. This is a very delicate job. They wrap the body very carefully with linen bandages, trying to pad the body out because, of course, removing the body's moisture will cause the body to shrink. So they had to pad the body to make it look more lifelike. In Roman times, these patterned bandages were a very important feature of the mummy's exterior. Moreover, spells were chanted continuously during this process, with a spell for each part wrapped. By the 52nd day, the 68th day, and by the 70th day, the burial procession was ready. The day of burial arrived, and after the mummy was placed in a wooden sarcophagus, followed by a second wooden shrine containing the canopic jars. Servants carried funeral goods following behind. Among the procession, the most striking were a group of professional mourners. They would grab soil and smear it on their heads and bodies, very dedicated. This group crossed the river to the west bank of the Nile, arriving at the cemetery to meet with the teachers. The ancient Egyptians' belief in the afterlife was very specific, which could be seen in their funeral rites. The most important part of the funeral was resurrection, that is, reviving the deceased's body. This was reflected in a ceremony called the opening of the mouth. 2 priests would lift the coffin containing the mummy, and another priest would touch the mummy's mouth with a strange tool while chanting spells, signifying that the mummy, the deceased, had been revived and could now eat and speak in the afterlife. By doing so, he once again became a living person. The family celebrated a sumptuous dinner with musicians and dancers, feeling that the deceased would enjoy the food. He had regained the ability to speak and eat, and he would participate in the ceremony with them, enjoying the name he had lost before with his family. Finally, amidst the feast and song, the mummy was slowly placed into the burial chamber. Afterward, a priest disguised as the god of wine swept the floor, erasing all footprints and anything that had come into contact with the mummy, including the embalming materials, which were all collected and buried not far from the tomb, marking the final completion of the funeral. 100 years ago, it was very common to unwrap mummies, examine the bodies themselves, and study Egyptian mummification practices. However, now mummies outside of Egypt are very precious, and obviously, unwrapping them means you destroy them forever. Therefore, we try to use non-destructive scientific analysis techniques to extract similar data, such as CAT scans, tissue samples, DNA tests, all of which are sources of technology we use today to study ancient human and animal remains. When wrapping the mummy layer by layer, many amulets were often placed inside. Now, without unwrapping the bandages, we can also see them using X-ray imaging. The function of the amulets has 2 points. One is to bless the deceased to reach eternal life smoothly. They are inscribed with excerpts from the Book of the Dead, many spells to bless the deceased on how to avoid evil forces and reach the land of paradise. Among them, the spell related to the heart is particularly important, reminding him not to reveal the owner's sins at the final judgment. The heart-related spell is often inscribed on a green scarab placed over the deceased's heart. The Ankh amulet is the most common amulet, symbolizing life. The Djed amulet represents the backbone of Osiris and is placed around the neck. The Udjat and the Eye of Horus amulets are sometimes placed separately and sometimes laid flat over the incision in the abdomen. The ancient Egyptians left the dry desert for the dead while keeping the fertile black soil of the Nile for themselves. Egyptian civilization is also known as the civilization of death or the civilization of burial. Their relentless pursuit of eternal life made the pyramids and mummies symbols of ancient Egyptian civilization. Although the era of the ancient Egyptians has long passed, their countless depictions and practices of the dream of the afterlife will forever be passed down.